As Emma said, this is a presentation of a study we did with on the IRC side, Valerie and myself, and with a couple of staff members from CINARA, particularly Johnny Rojas, Paula Tamayo, Alberto Benavides, and Vanessa Ibarra. This study, which was commissioned by the Inter-American Development Bank and which we did together. To start off, I think we need to do a little celebration because yesterday it was announced that the MDG for water has been reached. The report of the Joint Monitoring Program of UNICEF WHO announced that it has been reached already in 2010 according to their statistics. But we all know also all the big buts that we can ask at these figures, what is behind the statistics, and above all the sustainability of rural water supply. So let's celebrate, but also think a bit about the buts. And that is also what the presentation will be about. A bit of the background to the study. The Inter-American Development Bank, let's say the past decade, had mainly focused on urban water supply, but since a couple of years, since 2-3 years, have focused on rural water supply and sanitation again. And when they started working again on rural water supply, they encountered many sustainability issues. Where they wanted to start programs on rural water supply, they found out there were no statistics, no databases on what is the status of rural water supply system, what is the degree of sustainability of them. They had also recognized in their programs the need for post-construction support. They wanted to develop that, support that, but lacked a detailed insight of what are some of the key characteristics of post-construction support. What are some of the hows, the whats, the whens, the who that need to be answered when you develop post-construction support mechanisms. And above all, lack of quantitative data that supports the claims that post-construction support can indeed improve sustainability. So we were requested as IRC, together with CINARA, to support some of their knowledge development in the field of post-construction support and sustainability through a research study in Colombia, specifically with the objective to assess the effectivity and efficiency of various modalities for post-construction support to community-based water service providers on the quality and sustainability of water service delivered. In the original terms of reference, we were also asked to look into to sanitation, but only on communal sanitation, so basically sewage systems. We found that of the 40 systems, only 10 had sewage systems, and those were all managed by the municipality directly and not by the community-based service provider. So we left that out. So this is only about water supply. A bit of the context of Colombia, rural water service coverage figures. Definitions differ between somewhere 57 and 72% rural water supply coverage. So many people do have access to water, but if you include, for example, factors like the quality of water, which it should be according to JMP definitions, it's only 12%. Colombia has a long history of community-based management since the decentralization of 1991. Community-based service providers have been recognized in the legal framework as legitimate and legally established service providers, but municipalities have a role still in as what they call guarantors, so they guarantee sustainability of service providers. The role of post-construction support has never been made very explicit in the Colombian legal framework. It is a bit understood that that role of being a guarantor of sustainability includes technical assistance support to community-based service providers, but it has never been worked out in detailed frameworks and so on. So some municipalities have taken up this role, others have not. And while this has happened, and in some cases yes, some cases no, both national and regional governments in different parts of the country have started developing their own support programs, but in many areas these programs didn't reach. So there you have civil society initiatives. Aquacol, the Association of Community-Based Service Providers, is one of them, but also, for example, the Coffee Growers Association provides technical support to water systems in the coffee growing areas. So what did we do? We tried to make a quantitative analysis that looked into the characteristics of post-construction support and tried to link them to the service levels that people receive and the performance and the governance of the service provider. There, the idea being that if you have certain degree of post-construction support, the service provider can perform better, be better organized, and with that they can then provide better service, higher service levels. This was done in 40 rural water systems in 3 departments, Caldas, Cauca, and Valle del Cauca. And these 40 systems were supported by 7 different post-construction support models. These 7 were identified in the study we did last year as part of the PRIPLAN. So for each of these 7 support models, try to look at a couple of systems. The support models range from the Programa Cultura Empresarial, which is best translated as the business culture program of the national government, one program of a departmental government, one from a municipality, 2 models where an urban utility provides support to surrounding rural areas, 2 civil society examples, and 1 which is a model which is no post-construction support, or what we actually, and that I will discuss, nearly all systems receive some support, even the ones we have classified as no support, but that's much more on an ad hoc kind of basis and not a structured kind of post-construction support. So what we did, we developed indicator sets for the 3 levels in the study. The service levels, following the service ladder approach, also developed in the WASH cost, an indicator set to measure the performance and the governance of service providers, and an indicator set to describe support models. And we used there basically the scoring table approach. So, because that would allow comparison between the different systems, that would allow aggregation to higher levels of scale, quantifying qualitative data, so very much the QIS approach. And we also put ourselves one boundary condition: all data should be collectible in 1 day. If it would be more, then it would never be replicable within the local government system. So it has a large element of survey. We did, I think that was the only real participatory method, a kind of a user satisfaction with the focus group with these smiley faces. This is the service ladder that we developed for Colombia. The ones working on WASH cost will recognize this, this very much, the logic of it, where basically you can get a score of maximum 1 point for each of the 5 components. The components are the coverage, the continuity of supply, the water quality, the water quantity, and user satisfaction. If you score 1 point on each, you have a score of 5 and you have a very high service level. If you score 0.25, that's it. If you score on the lowest level, you get that 5 times 0.5, you are below 3, so you have a very deficient service. The specifics of the levels were derived largely from the Colombian norms and standards, for example, around water quality or water quantity. Where they didn't exist, we drew benchmarks based on, let's say, the professional judgment of staff from CINARA, experience from other studies. I think a big difference with the WASH cost service ladder is that the WASH cost service level scores the service level based on the lowest indicator. If you score 4 times a 1 and you score very low on one of the indicators, total service level is very low. Here we just added it up, summed it up to get to kind of an average of the. If we wouldn't do that, then we did that in the first round. We found all systems were scored as very deficient or deficient because there was always one of the indicators that was missing in all of the systems. We developed a similar kind of approach for the indicator set for the performance of service provider. Well, that's something where we have defined something like 21 indicators to describe the activities and the performance of those of the service provider in 3 subcategories. The first one being the internal governance and legality. That includes a number of indicators that deal with the compliance with the legal requirements, the organizational structure, the manner of decision making, whether it's participatory, whether there's a gender balanced water committee, and accountability mechanisms. A second group of indicators that deals with administrative management, including commercial aspects, accounting, bookkeeping, the degree of tariff payments, and so on. And the third one with technical and operational management indicators, including tasks that have to do with water resource management or catchment protection, better said. So in total, 21 indicators divided over these 3 subcategories. Again, you could get a score of maximum 1 per indicator and a minimum of 0. You add it all up, and then we apply the weighing factor so that you get a score on a scale from 0 to 100, If you had more than 80 points, you were classified as having a high-performing service provider. Between 60 and 79, it's an acceptable performance. You put the benchmark always at this level of between 60 and 79, and all the ones below are deficient or very deficient. And finally, we developed a set of indicators for post-construction support. We defined 13 variables, of which 3 we said these are variables that characterize the post-construction support, but we didn't want to give it a score. For example, whether the post-construction support model works on a demand or a supply basis, but we didn't know beforehand whether working on a supply or a demand basis would be better or worse, so we couldn't give it a 1 or a 0 or something in between. So these were just used as descriptive variables. Then we had also 10 indicators where we again applied the QIS scoring methods, where you could get the score from 0 to 1. And these actually are indicators that measure the degree of formality of these post-construction support models. For example, the extent to which a post-construction support model had explicit targets, objective, a clear organizational structure, had well-defined job profiles for the technicians that provide the support, and so on. And the data on this was collected through semi-structured interviews with the support models and a survey among them. What are some of the findings? Oh, sorry, this bar now blocks the most interesting table. How do I do this? How do I do this?
Kunt u hem ook als je gewoon in het screen gaat, die tikt hem gewoon naar beneden. Ja? Oké.
Oh yeah, good, sorry. This is the first set of findings. What we found is that 20 of the 40 systems had a service level that was acceptable or high, and the other 20 deficient or very deficient. So you can say 50% of the systems comply with the norms and standards of Colombia. So really a question, is the glass half full or half empty? I think it's half empty if you don't comply with so many. But 2 important comments need to be made. We found that the most limiting factors affecting the total score were water quality and water quantity. And a major reason for that is that many systems didn't have any information on water quality or on water quantity. And not having information automatically gave a system the lowest score. We said if the service provider doesn't have information on water quality nor on water quantity, you can't be providing a good quality, a good service. Doesn't say anything, maybe the quality is very good, but the fact that the service provider doesn't have it is a sign in itself. So it may be that the actual level of service that people receive is better than what is portrayed in this table, but the data is not there to sustain. And of course, this is not seen as a problem at all by the users. We found that even if water quality data was not available, water quality was bad, users were still quite satisfied with the service. The main reason why users were satisfied or not was with the continuity. That was the only variable where we found any correlation between user satisfaction and, let's say, the physical measures. So the amount of water or the quality were not considered main factors in these communities for satisfaction or dissatisfaction among the users. What did we find on the performance of the service provider? There we found that less than half had an acceptable or a high score on performance. So here the glass is really more than half empty in terms of the performance of service providers. What we found though is that on there were higher than average scores on the administrative management side. In terms, for example, of tariff recollection, non-payment rates were relatively low, but where above all low scores were obtained is in the technical management, particularly the more advanced side of technical management like catchment protection, water metering. The table that I show in this shows for each of the 3 categories what are the most common factors affecting low scores and what are the most common high scores. So you find in the category of governance and legality, very low scores were obtained in terms of customer relations and in terms of the gender balance in the water committee. and high scores were obtained in terms of interinstitutional relationships and renewal of water committees. So many of the water committees had established good relationship with the municipalities and so on, but didn't have customary relation place or had not well-balanced gender, not a good balance in gender in the water committee. By the way, we also scored them very low if you would only have women in the water committee. So that was in fact a major reason for why the score was low. In many cases, there was water committees with only women. Well, the same goes for all the other categories. The details you will find in. I won't go now into all the details here. We then looked into what extent do contextual factors influence either the service provider performance or the service level. We found that settlement size, so the number of users in the system, didn't have any impact on service level, but did have an important impact on the performance of the service provider. Basically, in a bigger village, you have more chance of having a good functioning service provider, probably more capacity in the village, more professional capacity there. Technology type also was found to impact on the performance and particularly on water quality. But what was surprising is that the more complex systems had better management. So systems that either had treatment plants or pumping systems. And the reason for that is what our assumption there is that those systems with more complex systems have also received more support. When they developed treatment plants, they also received support in tariff setting, organization, and so on. Actually, the simplest systems had the poorest performance, also in terms of the service provider performance. And we found that the age of systems affects the performance. The older systems worked significantly better in terms of the management. That was also a bit of a surprise. We thought that systems would go down in performance over time, but we actually found the opposite. Probably the service provider gets more experienced, gets better established, it starts meeting all the legal requirements and thereby getting a higher performance of the service providers. Or indeed, that is indeed the ones that don't perform, drop out and don't end up in the sample. These are then, this is an example of how the settlement size influences on the performance. You see 3 categories: settlements with less than 100 people, between 100 and 300, and more than 300. Not I shouldn't say persons, but user families. So in total, the biggest group is more than 1,500 inhabitants. And you see the average score plus the confidence interval. So you see the biggest ones have a significantly better performance in terms of service provider function than the smaller ones. Then we try to look, is there any relation between the performance of the service provider and the actual level of service that people receive? And this graph says it all. There is a correlation, but it is not very strong. It's mainly at the extremes. The best performing service providers actually also provide a good level of service. The worst organized service providers deliver a bad level of service, but the middle group is very scattered out. And yeah, it's difficult to see how what the reason for that is. But having a good performance and service provision roles doesn't necessarily mean that the service that people receive is good. And again, one of the factors that has blurred this a lot is the fact that there was so little, so few service providers with information on water quality and water quantity, so that affected that quite a bit. And the ones that had good performance were also the ones who collected water quality data or made sure that they had that information or got it from somewhere. And that immediately affected the scores. This is another way of looking at it, where you on the bottom line is the 4 categories of performance of the service provider, and on the y-axis is the score, where you can see that the 2 bars on the right-hand side, so the well-performing service providers have higher scores in terms of service level. And you will see that above all that difference is explained by the purple bar, which is water quality. So the best performing service providers had much higher scores on water quality. Basically, they were the ones who collected data on water quality, made sure that they addressed the issue. That explains a large part of the difference between the different categories. Then, to what extent does post-construction support make an impact? Well, first of all, what you found, except for 2 systems, all systems had received some form of support over the last year. In some cases, it was really an ad hoc, 1 off or 2 off visit. Others had really a structural form of post-construction support. We did an original analysis, and then there was a difference between the 2 categories, but it was not significant. But we said, well, actually, we need to reclassify all the data based on our findings. We had many systems classified as not receiving support, but actually they did. So we reclassified those as having post-construction support. Others were supposed to be linked to a post-construction support model, but hadn't seen anyone or only 1 person over the last year. So we declassified them as not having support. And after that reclassification, we found indeed post-construction support does lead to statistically significant better performance of service provider, but not to better service levels. So it does have an impact on how the service provider is organized, how it does its bookkeeping, how it does its management, but doesn't automatically translate into better service levels. You see it in the table below, that the systems linked to a post-construction support model have an average score of 61, which is just acceptable, and the ones without support have, on average, a score of 48, which is deficient. You see that the ones with post-construction support score slightly better on service level, but that is not statistically significant. And even with support, the average performance is really barely acceptable. So it is still quite far from really the highest level of service that you may want to see. And that is largely explained by this graph. Here you see the most left-hand column is the score for the ones without support, and then you get the 7 different support models. You see huge variation within and between the different support models. Some of the support models, such as Aguas Manantiales de Pácora, had actually a service performance lower than the ones without support, whereas Aquacol or the government program, the Programa Cultura Empresarial, had much higher performance levels, and the systems attended by them. So there is huge variation between the different support models. So then we said, well, we shouldn't look so much at the models as such, but at some of the common factors that may explain high or low performance. And we found that the following. First of all, out of the 10 or so factors we had originally thought, none appeared to be significant in terms of explaining the difference. However, we found some correlation, albeit a low correlation, with 2 factors. First of all, the degree of formality of the support models, and that relates a bit to the staff profiles and the institutionalization. Those models which have clear staff profiles, that have a good mix of technical and social and administrative staff, had much better performance than the ones without clear job profiles, and the ones that had a higher degree of institutionalization. So where the support model had clear objectives, organogram, structure, targets, performed much better than the ones where the support function was a bit on a kind of an on-the-side activity. We found also a significant impact on the frequency of support activities. The more frequent the support activities were, the better the service provider performed. So partially it's the institutionalization, partially the frequency. And a 4th factor, which is still a bit difficult to capture, is those models that work more and as a kind of an interinstitutional model perform better. So where, for example, a good example was the case of the Cali municipality, where they provide some of the support but also acted as a kind of a node referring to other dedicated entities. So if a community would come to them with a specific problem that the municipality couldn't solve, the municipality could send them to a training institute or to the environmental authority, for example. So those with more that reference role function much better rather than trying to do all the support in-house. So I think this is what we found. Some of these are trends that are not statistically significant, or this, particularly the frequency, is statistically significant within this sample. So I think it gives us a bit of an idea what are really important factors within post-construction support. This is the table that shows the relationship between the frequency of the support activities and the average performance of the different systems. So you see it going up, and then there's one bar to the side. These were communities that had more than 12 visits a year, but these appear to be all communities where an implementation project was ongoing, hence the high frequency of support of visits. So what are the conclusions? First, on the use of these indicator sets. I think at system level, the two indicator sets work quite well. Above all, the use of the scoring tables was very much appreciated, both by the water committees as well as by the official. However, for statistical analysis, it is not a useful kind of method, because it limits the extent to which you can do regression analysis with categorized data. It's better to have the continuous, the absolute numbers, rather than the scoring levels. But when you have qualitative data, that is the only kind of measure you have. We had two sets of indicators, one of 5, one of 21, but in reality there's over 75 indicators, because many of the indicators are composite ones. So it was easy to collect much more information than was needed. And yeah, we fell in the same trap as that everyone always falls in. You collect lots of data, half of which you don't even use, yeah, and even that, and what you use is even more than what you actually need. One indicator we clearly missed out was the one on information management. How do service providers deal with information? What information do they have? How do they access information? It's an indicator we hadn't dealt with, but with all the issues around the data on water quality and quantity, I think it's an important one that we missed out on. The set of variables we developed for the post-construction support model, well, I think it's a bit balanced, that experience. They are good to describe the degree of formality of the model, but it is not a set that can explain or describe its possible impact. Of the 10, only 2 were very lowly correlated with the performance. Then the conclusions in terms of really the findings themselves. Yeah, you can say the glass is half empty. Half of the surveyed systems had acceptable levels of service, but more than half had underperforming service providers. And the low scores are particularly due to, on the one hand, water quality and water quantity data, or the lack of data on them, and the poor technical management. But I think to many it was a positive finding that there were relatively high scores in financial management, the organizational development of the service providers. And yeah, this was explained also in the stakeholder work by the high emphasis given on that in Colombia over the past years by the government itself, but also by Aquacol, by CINARA, who had done lots of work on this aspect. The score is also explained to some extent by these contextual factors like settlement size, type of technology, systems. And we concluded there's a low correlation between the performance of the service provider and the service level that people actually get. Another part of the conclusion is that nearly all systems receive support. I think that confirms the study done 2 years ago or so by the World Bank on post-construction support in Bolivia and Peru and Ghana, where they also found something like nearly everyone gets support, but a big chunk of that is an ad hoc kind of support, and not a structured support. I think in our case it was around 30% of the sample received this ad hoc support. And those with the structured post-construction support have significantly better performing service providers, but not necessarily better service levels. We can also conclude there's a high variability within and between the support models. It's not that one model works better than the other. Rather, we need to look at what are some of these underlying factors, and the ones that we conclude to be that explain that effectivity are the degree of institutionalization, the frequency of support, and the interinstitutional character of the support model. We couldn't draw any conclusions on the efficiency of the different support models. First of all, only very few cases we had cost data. I think Katarina would have been here, she could have explained a bit more on direct support cost findings in wash cost, but it was, yeah, within the scope of this project impossible to get any data. So we used the number of staff, the personnel, as a proxy indicator, and that didn't yield any kind of information on the efficiency. So that, yeah, that's an area that needs to Recommendations. There is clearly a need to strengthen the performance of service providers and service levels in Colombia. If you want to celebrate your MDGs, there's clearly still a step to go in terms of the services that people actually get. Post-construction is one of the factors that can help with that. But yeah, some of these are also contextually explained. We would recommend very much to go for a post-construction support approach to contribute at least to strengthen those levels. What is needed for that is, first of all, to clarify and specify those mandates for post-construction support, elaborate them more in detailed guidelines, frameworks for that, but recognizing the variety of mechanisms that already exist in 3 departments already, finding so many support models is a sign in itself, and there is some capacity there that you can build on. But a key role there for municipalities, because they often can play that central node, referring service providers to different forms of support. For those support models that currently score low, there's obviously a need to further formalize and institutionalize their support roles. We would further recommend to use a monitoring tool like this to identify both generic support needs as well as specific ones. But we found that of all the support activities, monitoring was actually the least frequently done. Most of the support was technical assistance or training or retraining. Monitoring hardly figured there. So a tool like this would be very welcomed. And I think the final recommendation would be to strengthen the devolution of information to service providers. We found many cases where actually the support agency had come to do water quality testing, but had never sent the results back to the community, or had sent it back but never explained what do these results mean. If you have then a score of 85, what does it say to a community? So these are some of the specific recommendations to the support models. And with that, I would like to say gracias.
Okay.
Patrick, you were the first to ask a question.
Just read the question.
Patrick?
Hang on a minute.
Yeah. You're there.
You have the floor.
Yeah, I was... Who has the floor?
You.
Me. Okay. Yeah. What was my question? I know I typed it in. I'm trying to find it.
Can you read it?
I think it was to do... I think it was to do with your decision not to go with the... to put an averaging across the levels. And I just... It's probably maybe something to discuss another time. I have some sort of methodological problems with that, because it seems to me that you're then... Yeah, I mean, averaging within steps like that, I'm not really clear what it is you're saying. I mean, at least in theory, you could have a system that's providing no water at all, and yet because the quality of that no water is good, and you get up to a good score. So I wondered, and then you said, well, the reason you've done that, or maybe I misinterpreted it, the reason you've done that was because otherwise they all scored very low.
Yeah.
Okay. So we go question by question. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'll quickly answer. I'll quickly answer that. Yeah, I think we struggled with this one, and we decided to go for the average because we first analyzed what are some of these limiting factors. Is it the quality or the continuity? And then we found that the main limiting factor in most cases was not having the data on quality or quantity, and that made us thinking then it's maybe better to justify the averaging out, because there are no such cases as where there is no water of good quality, or what do you say? There is no good water, and the water that is not there is of good quality, or. So in most cases you end up somewhere in the middle category anyway, and that's why we went for this this average approach. But we have also done first the analysis with the other approach, but we decided in the end that looking at the overall picture, this average gives a better representation of what is what is there.
Okay, Harry. Jean has another question. Okay, Jean, can you come in with your question?
Jean?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
My main question is around the type of support activities that are being provided in the different cases. What is a provider activity and what is a support activity, and how do you compare across different models if those activities don't correlate across the models? So, for example, who's doing preventative maintenance in the different models? Is every model receiving preventative maintenance?
I think in the case of Colombia, the role for maintenance, whether it's preventative or curative, is always with the service provider. It's the service provider who does that work. We did include what we try to do for the support models. So the ones who provide support to the service provider, we made a long list of possible activities they could do, and one of them was helping identifying capital maintenance needs. So it can be the role of the support provider to say, well, your tank is nearly about to collapse, you need to start working on that, and we can help you in writing even a project formulation for that. So we listed for the 7 different support models which activities they do carry out and which ones they see them as being there. I must say that that whole area of preventative maintenance or capital maintenance hardly figured there. Most of it was really technical advice, helping in bookkeeping, doing audits of the books and so on. So in that sense, yeah, that is, I think, a bit of an alarming situation that preventive maintenance doesn't come out. And there you see that what we also did is we compared the different models on how many types of activities they do and whether that results in better performance or not. So some support models only did 2 activities, let's say training and technical advice. Other models provided a whole suite of potential activities, but that didn't yield any better. It wasn't a factor that explains the difference in performance.
Just in response to that, if I can just ask a question, to what extent is the actual model relevant to what the institution, to the type of support the institution is providing? Is it relevant whether the institution providing the support is an NGO, a utility, or a local government? And should we be looking at that as a factor, particularly if we're looking across countries?
Well, in this
study, is it not more about really coming to grips with what support that entity is providing and how well they provide that support?
Yeah. So indeed, we didn't find that the type of institutional arrangement, whether it's local government or civil society or national government, was the main factor. What is a main factor that explains that is the, let's say, the institutional mandate that such an organization has, the frequency with which it is provided, and the kind of interinstitutional character of it. But having said that, the interinstitutional character more or less puts it already in the government's corner, because the government often have more this mandate of trying to link up. But then you get cases like Aquacol, which is the Association of Community-Based Service Providers, which performed actually very well in that sense. So it is indeed not the specific institutional arrangement, but yeah, the way how these models are formalized.
Operating.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. There's a third question, Hardy. Peter, yeah. Peter? Peter Berry, can you speak up and turn on your...
Switch off the webcam.
Okay, so we just...
Maybe try later.
Okay, we try later. Christine.
I wanted to ask a question because I have to leave. First, a remark. The MPA, we also looked into the relation between the way the systems were planned and set up and the way they were administered and the way they performed. So for the second part, it's very interesting. But we did find we had 4 countries among the 10 from Latin America, and we did find that the committees make no difference in Latin America because the decisions are made in the general assemblies, and that seems to be very specific in Latin America. So they want to take that into account. You said that the committees, whether they were male or female, didn't have any influence, but we have found the same in the MPA, and it was because actually important decisions are done in a user assembly with all the outputs. So their decision making is different in the model in Latin America, so that may be interesting.
Because the water committee is more the executive branch.
So that I found The other point was about that you can't do statistical analysis, a regression analysis. Well, I had to prove in the best of the worlds that actually an ordinal scale in this case can be treated as an integral scale. And I used natural sciences because they do exactly the same. So it's not true. You can do
but you can't do it using the common kind of methods that are there. There is a couple of extra steps that make it then more difficult and less straightforward to do. And we tried for some of the data for which we did have the continuous data or the absolute values, we tried to do it as well, and that then yields immediately better figures. But when you have, let's say, ordinal data on both axes, the x and the y axis, it becomes much more difficult to do it with, let's say, the conventional set of statistics.
But based on my question was if it would be as kind of a follow-up activity, because we seem to have more of this type of data, whether this is not something where we should get all this data together and publish an article or something like that on trends kind of thing. So, I mean, what's the next step really? I mean, not only in Latin America, but for IRC as a whole. That's my question.
Okay, I think that's maybe a good question to end with at the end of the debate. But maybe there are before that a question for Clem.
Okay, so just let me park Christine's question, and I'll make sure we come back to that. So the value and for IRC's work and how to continue, how to further build on this work. Okay, thank you, Christine. Tom was going to ask something.
Yeah, I have probably misunderstood it, but what I understand is post-construction support has a positive impact on the performance of the service provider. But it doesn't. But the performance of the service provider doesn't have an impact on the quality of the service. So I don't understand it. How can a high-performing service provider deliver a lousy service, and the other way around? How can a low-performing service provider deliver a high quality of service? That's impossible. Or isn't it?
But that is also, I think, the question that we are. On the extreme side, yes, that is true. But in the big group in the middle, that relation is not very clear. And I think one of the reasons for that is indeed this lack of data that I think explains a lot. So you can have a service provider which does a reasonable job, but because that service provider doesn't have any water quality data, its score on the service level becomes low, and it appears that you have a high-performing service provider but providing.
But doesn't that undermine your research in one way? Because that is what you want to have some kind of an ideal. Support improves provider performance, improves service level. Yeah. But if that last step you can't do because of your data problem, then what is still your level of conclusions? What is the validity of your conclusions?
That based on these data, you can't say that the service provider is automatically or directly related to a good level of service. If over time you would get that kind of data, then you may adjust your conclusion. But the fact that how do you call it? They don't collect that information, or they manage that data, should probably have given a lower score to the service provider, but that was a factor that we didn't use. And I think in that sense, you also have to realize that many of these data in the end are partially subjective with any kind of scoring system. What we, for example, didn't do is put more weight on some factors or other factors. Like, for example, the continuity of supply was in nearly all the cases was very high. So maybe we could have given a lower weight to that than to water quality or water quantity. Another reason that we also had lots of discussions about is we gave a low score to those systems where they had a high water consumption because we wanted to stick very close to the Colombian normative framework, where it says if you have a high water consumption, you are spilling the water. Well, we found out in many cases that was for multiple use. So the users were very happy. I would be very happy to see that it's for multiple use, but we had to qualify them as a low score because they were doing inefficient water use. So there are some factors that can explain that that is not a one-on-one relation between the service provider and the level of...
But very complex, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when I read it the first time, also because I'm biased, because I would like to see that support has a positive influence, etc., on the quality of the service. But when I read it the first time, I understood the conclusion to be there is no clear correlation between performance of the service provider and the quality of the service.
Yeah.
And I think you have to be very careful with what you are, how you present it. If the data collection is so complex,
Yeah.
With lack of data and your indicate of Colombian.
Yeah, so I think that indeed, yeah, but it's very clear on the extremes, but not in that middle group, and that there's all kind of explanation for that.
Okay, let's try to keep it. I hear some hands up, and then I come back to you, Patrick, also. First, Rusika.
I was a little confused about this water quality stuff.
Yeah.
Did you, so you were basically just checking if...
I can't hear.
Yeah, you have to speak up a little bit, Rusika. Yeah, I'll come closer. Yeah.
So you were basically just checking if they have data about water quality.
Yeah.
You didn't check water quality yourself because that would be another option.
Yeah. No, we said, so if the service provider had water quality data, we use those, and in the ranking, we will see that here in this slide. So if they then had a score on the IRCA, that's kind of a composite. If the data set it had a 0, they actually get a high score. The lower the IRCA, the better the water quality. But if no water quality data was available, it had a lower score. But we said data collection needs to be possible in one day. So water quality tests, measuring water quantity, none of that was done as part of this exercise. Because we also said not having water quality data probably says something about how the service provider is organized. And we did find there another interesting figure is that in Calda's department, where they never had done lots of work on water quality, actually there was hardly any water quality data, and where it was very poor. In the Valle del Cauca, where various organizations had been working on water quality, nearly all the service providers did have the data, and they scored reasonably good on that. So it does make an influence there whether the support model has been addressing that particular topic.
Okay. Tempted to say something, but Dedra.
Just to go a different direction, maybe link back to the question Christine posed, but slightly different. Not only what's the value for IRC's work and how to continue, but the funder of this research, how are they engaging with your findings? What are they doing with it? And how will it be possible for us to track, if at all they have uptake of it in their policies and their practice? And that I'd like to know. What next?
Yeah. What I can say on that, at this moment, the Inter-American Development Bank is working with the government of Colombia in formulating a loan for rural water supply. In addition, they have $2 million, they call it, I think, the innovation project, in which they want to test out innovative approaches to rural water supply. One of them is post-construction support models. In their original conception, they wanted to set up mini aquacols in different parts of the country, because that was the model they knew. And I think on the base of this, they have seen actually aquacol is a model, but also working with municipalities is another model. And maybe, as I think was also said, it's not so much the specific institutional arrangements. It's much more these underlying factors, like the frequency of visits, the institutional backup. So they want to use.
Are they building that into their practices?
Well, first in the innovation project. In the innovation project, they want to develop new institutional support models, drawing on the lessons of this study. The other expectation that we had is that this indicator set could be used somehow to strengthen the monitoring systems in Colombia. I honestly think that is a long shot. There is a very strong regulator, a typical regulator, which asks for like 1,000 indicators, even from a rural water supply provider. CINARA and them are in a dialogue with that. Yeah, I think that is a longer dialogue. That's not so easily addressed.
Maybe just to add, in relation to what the Inter-American Development Bank will be doing with this results, I think I can also explain that this feeds into the generic set of indicators we are working on.
Yeah, that's another contract we now have with the Inter-American Development Bank, who want to do more work on monitoring and sector information systems in Central America and in South America. We are supporting that in 3 countries, Honduras, El Salvador, and Paraguay. There are other initiatives in the region as well. One is called CSR, focused on the Central American countries, which uses not exactly these indicators, but indicator sets that are, have the same kind of conceptual background to it, the same, let's say, sets at the 3. They add even a 4th level, the use of QIS and scoring tables for that. So I think it builds and contributes to broader improvement.
But is that project monitoring or is it sector monitoring?
Sector monitoring.
Sector monitoring. Yeah.
Okay, I think Patrick was there with a question. Patrick?
Yeah, perhaps more, I mean, just a couple of points, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, firstly, I think there is a kind of a slight methodological problem with relying on provider data, both to measure the quality of the service being provided and to look at the quality of the provider themselves. I think, and I can absolutely see why you did it that way. But I think ideally that's exactly why you'd like to get your service quality data from somewhere other than relying on provider data. I mean, the problem that Tom's picking up on, it's not new. I mean, it was, that's the work that what's her name, Camidas and Macalian and people did, a few years ago in Ghana. They found the same thing. Not a great deal of evidence that post-construction support leads to improved services, which again, I was saying it earlier, I think you've then got to be careful that your absence of data, absence of evidence isn't taken as evidence of absence. It's basically just that the data's crap, and that, you're probably looking for non-linear effects. I don't think that, I wouldn't expect that, by going from 1 to 2, I don't know, 1 to 2 guys managing the system, you'd expect to see a doubling in service quality. It's complex, it's non-linear. It probably means that you've got you've got all sorts of threshold effects where below a certain amount of spending you just won't see anything at all, and then once you get to a certain level of quality of spending, you'd suddenly expect to see a much better service. And doing correlations and stuff, you're not going to pick that up. It's that sort of statistics won't work for things like that. So I think, really what we're reflecting again is the difficulty of coming up with the kind of clear, unambiguous, easy answers that,
Oh, Patrick?
Okay.
Oops, you've gone frozen.
Okay. Well, maybe in the meantime we're covering him. I think after this methodological discussion, basically, is there somebody else? How do you want to?
John.
Oh, John. Okay, John. John, can you come in?
John made a remark. I think you got it right from reading the report, Steph, but you would need a bigger sample and random sampling to show the influence on impact.
Yeah, I think the sample size is okay for the communities with support because there are just fewer communities with support. So there we have a good sample. We would need a much bigger sample of communities without support to draw more meaningful conclusions on that side.
Okay. Patrick is back, but I think he made his main point, or not?
Yeah.
You were going to react on what Patrick said?
No, I think in view of the time, maybe let's go to Christine's question.
The last question, yeah, just a few minutes to reflect on this last question. Okay, what's the value of this meeting, of this work for IRC, more broad? How do we further build on this kind of work, of this work in particular? Maybe yourself, I have some reflections for Steph. Can I ask you first, and then maybe the rest of the
Well, to me there are two sides to it. First of all, I think is on the whole area of monitoring service providers. I think there is a very clear demand from various clients for this kind of work. I think what I just also said in response to Deirdre's question, there is a big movement, at least in Latin America, for measuring performance of service providers, for comparing service levels. I think the work that Ton has started on the symposium, the monitoring service delivery, shows that this is an area where there's lots of demands for it. People want to move beyond measuring coverage and measure service levels, service providers. I think that is one area of work that is of interest in itself. I think secondly, we are often accused of not using enough quantitative data, that lots of it is qualitative. I think these kind of studies can help getting a bit better insight into the quantitative, the numbers behind it, with all the caveats that you need to have. I mean, there is, in every scoring that you do, there's lots of subjectivity. How do you go for average, or do you go for a minimum? How do you score it if the data is unavailable? These are all the issues we grappled with as well. At a certain moment you need to take decisions. So the quantitative data is very useful, but we also always need to interpret it with some caution and really be very careful how we formulate the conclusions in that sense. But I do think there's a huge value in doing some of this quantitative research and in a meaningful way. I wouldn't do a randomized control trial on this. And I think it needs to accompany the qualitative research. So I have always seen this study also as a complement to the more qualitative research we did last year in Colombia with the Triple S project. How this then can be combined with, that was the other part of Christine's question, with the work being done in Ghana that we saw in the previous presentation by Nick and Marika, or what is being done in Uganda. I find that difficult because the specific indicators, they differ quite a bit. I mean, here we are talking in the case of Colombia very much on water quality data, and if I look at what Marika is finding, you're really talking on even getting the basic quantities right. So to what extent can you draw similar conclusions? In Colombia, we got a completely different setup for service provider arrangements than in Ghana or Uganda. So I'm not yet clear for myself how to compare across countries. Can you put it all in one big database and draw some conclusions, or do you do your country studies and then try to come to a synthesis? That I don't have clear yet. But maybe, yeah, maybe others have ideas on that. So I'd like to hear also maybe from Patrick on that from your Ghana experience.
Okay.
Can
Are
I?
you going to say something? Okay. Yeah, Tom, you want to say, and then maybe we can go back to Patrick. He can think about what he's going to answer to. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just simple request for information. How many of the rural water systems in Colombia are being managed by communities?
I think 90%.
90%. Okay.
Yeah.
I could imagine that also municipalities would be more kind of utility setup would be.
Yeah, those are well. They say there's around 10,000 water supply systems in Colombia, of which 1,000 are really registered with the regulator as either municipal or privately managed or mixed arrangement. Another 5,000 or so are already in the system as community managed, and they assume that all the other 80% that is not even in the system are all community managed. Those are the estimates that they manage, so it's 90% community managed. And that is basically 99% of the rural system. So the 1,000 that are not community management are mainly small town, urban.
And I think this is true for entire Latin America, basically.
Yeah.
Yes. So the kind of what you find in Africa with the small private operators is not very common in rural Latin America.
But also not very common in rural Africa.
Well, in the rural growth centers, like in
Growth centers.
or in, I think in Ghana, small towns.
Where does rural stop and urban start in Colombia?
And in Colombia, it's not dependent on the size; it's on the based on administrative. If you're the main town of the municipality, you're urban. If you're not the main town in the municipality, you're rural. So you can find sometimes that a rural settlement is classified as, because it's not the main town in the municipality, it's classified as rural, but it's bigger in size than the main town, which is classified as urban and smaller.
Okay.
So it's not dependent on population size.
No, that's interesting. No, but that's, I think, your question about follow-up, I think it is indeed probably the difference between different countries which we should focus on, because it is in the future about differences. It's not in the future about what is common across them, I think. So research that contributes to getting more clarity on the specifics of Colombia or the specifics of Latin America in one case is more interesting than, I think, research that draws general conclusions across countries about post-construction support.
Yeah.
But maybe one reflection on the value of this work and the work last week in Paraguay, working with them on the system and in the stage of developing the indicators. This was a huge help as a reference, as the way you set it up. You know, the more general indicators. Of course, the difficulty is in really making it country-specific, contextualize it, and to find out what the kind of benchmark is. You know, and then you come into huge discussions, of course. But as a setup and as a reference, it was already very valuable. Yeah. Better?
Just to underscore, when really what was almost not prominent enough for me then in the whole thing are we need that data presented in this way to have the convincing argument to help Paraguay along the way to have the general indicators. But the real devil was in the detail. It was the mandate, the frequency, and the interinstitutional character in terms of networking node. Those three things, that is the context-specific, really interesting thing, but it came out really soft and at the end. And to me, it's, this is fascinating. The method, the approach, the thinking that you guys did on how to weight things, how to organize it, how to da-da-da. But what it really came down to were these hyper-specific contextual issues at the end. And if those aren't somehow, if we don't have a way to quickly get to the heart of it and know this will make all the difference in this setting, that's got to come out clearer and quicker. Yes, all of this other work has got to be done because it's what convinces people to listen in the first place. It's our window dressing. It's really hard work. I don't mean to make it sound not important. But the really important message was buried at the bottom and soft, but so important.
Can I just see if there is one last reflection maybe, because I think we have to draw it to an end.
Well, we had maybe the point with Patrick.
Your question to Patrick, huh? Yeah.
What so what was the question? How did this compare to what we did in Ghana? And how what's the value of linking these various initiatives together across countries? A bit what Christine's question was. I'd say, okay. You know what I noticed, trying to look in more detail at your service ladder and not having read the paper yet, so sorry, is the service levels that we're describing in Ghana and in the ones we're using from Washington in Africa and Asia are really describing absolutely radically different levels of service, and frankly I don't think that your ladder is. And I think that's basically because most people in Latin America are already accessing something that is a medium or better service. I mean, we've commented on this before, and I suspect that that's where you're running into problems in not finding a correlation either. You know, you can keep, again, it's non-linear. You can pump money into improving the quality of service. We all know that, even from our own experience with services. Some people are very inefficient, some are effective, and are more efficient. I think then it's more like you get into this sort of benchmarking, using this as a benchmarking competition between service providers. But you know, this I think Tom or someone was hinting at it. Yeah, I mean the inter-country comparison is difficult because this doesn't say much to someone from Ghana, where most people are still getting their water out of a rural point source, and the big discussion is it worth the extra investment to go from a rural point source to a fairly poorly managed pipe network that still has most people getting their water from a standpipe. Do you know what I mean? So, you know, to go from a point source to a standpipe to a house connection, those are big, meaningful service levels where you can attach cost data and stuff to it. To go from a service level that functions less than for 12 hours a day to 23 hours a day, it's a much finer level of distinction you're drawing there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think one.
And I fully agree with, sorry, just a final comment. I absolutely agree with Deirdre's point. I think this is more a communications thing, but as this is still in-house, we are still presenting this in very classical academic format of kind of methods and theory, methods, results, conclusions. I really think if we want to open these up as webinars for the general public, we need to turn that around. I put your, you know, pull the audience in with what you found first of all. Think hard about the messaging that's coming out of it, and some of the detail you can leave for later, or say, you know, wow, this. If it was Ned Breslin, I just imagine Ned giving this, and he'd be saying, wow, this was awesome, and we found this, and we found that, and now I'll tell you a little bit about the method we used. And that's what I think, you know, that's just a communications point that I think we need to all, me included, get better at.
Well, and that's the interesting thing of doing an inter-country comparison, are what are those granular level factors that make all the difference. In this context, by doing it in this way, we came to the point that it was mandate frequency and interinstitutional character. In Ghana, it's this. In East Africa, it's that. That would be the interesting comparative study.
Granular.
Yeah. Okay, I think we will close this up step. Thank you. One last word from your...
No, I thought I just wanted to say that maybe that it was great to do this in this go-to meeting approach. I really...
No, it's nice.
I mean, I'm sure that maybe bits have gone lost or not everyone could hear it, but I thought it was great, this experiment. And thanks to Ari and Michel and Petra and Joanna and all the others who have made also the technicalities of this possible.
Okay. And along we will go improving, but good. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.